Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome back Mr. Tim Daniels.
Thank you. Hello again, everybody. Well, the discussions today are turning out to be really productive and concrete and really quite fascinating and amazing. Earlier, we learned how businesses can mitigate and adapt the impacts of climate change. And now we'll dive even deeper as we tackle the various methods and the interventions that are going to help us better respond to the climate issue. Let's begin with the first of two technical sessions that we still have. And please welcome the moderator, Executive Director of World Wildlife Fund for Nature Philippines, Ms. Trin Custodio.
Thank you very much, Tim. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for sticking around. We've asked you to work so hard today. If I may just ask people to move forward, I hope that's okay to ask. Thank you very much. So as this is our technical session, our format will be a little bit different than the fireside chats or the panels earlier. We will have some input from our esteemed panel members and then to be followed by a moderated Q&A. The goal of the session is to provide you with an overview of the different frameworks and standards so that we can measure what matters. So I will introduce the first speaker who is giving his presentation via Zoom. He is the Science-Based Target Manager for Southeast Asia and Oceania of the Carbon Disclosure Project that runs the global disclosure system for universities, companies, and cities. We will have first Mr. Dedi Mahardika.
Nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Dedi Mahardika, and I'm sitting with the Science Based Target Initiative as the SBT Engagement Manager for Southeast Asia and Oceania. Thank you again for the invitation from the organizer for today's event, which is organized by SM Investment Corporations as well as WWF Philippines. So today I will hopefully setting the context for the discussion that will be much more into technical of making sense of the different measures here. So I will give a brief update about the Science-Based Target Initiative, what is actually meant by setting the target based on the science, as well as what is the requirement to join the SBTI here. Yeah, let's start by introducing the Science-Based Target Initiative. If you are not yet familiar with them, SBTI is a global body that enabling the companies and also business to set ambitious emission reduction targets in line with the latest climate science here. You may see based on the number here, it's already exceeding 4,000 companies joining us in the initiative. And the SBTI actually being founded by 4 different partners here, CDP, UN Global Compact, World Resources Institute, and also WWF, and also in collaboration with Women Business Coalition. The initiative was being founded in 2015 during the Paris Agreement, and it's already becoming like the best practices for companies to set the emission to be in line with the science. In terms of the current progress of SBTI, we published at the middle of this year the progress report of last year, 2021, and it is being analyzed that 35% of global market capitalization actually are joining our initiative. With that is including 27% high impact companies, which means that not only the companies that are working in the easy to abate, but also hard to abate sector joining our initiative. And annually, the total committed emission reductions is equals to 53 million tons of CO2 here. And then this will show you the global reach of Science-Based Target Initiative. You may see that the biggest uptake, of course, coming from the Europe, because of course, Europe is like the major market, and also there are so many different capacities that are being supported to the companies. And also Asia and North America is the second one. Although actually Asia should do a lot better, because in terms of the market size, the companies in Asia are not yet joining the initiative as it should be. So there should be some strategies to the companies that are the outreach, and also how the companies in Asia could contribute more in joining the Science-Based Target Initiative here. Okay, so that's a bit introduction of Science-Based Target, and let me bring back to you to the light, which is what is actually the net zero standard here. So what does it mean actually by reaching the net zero economy here? You may see that in the graph here, currently actually the greenhouse gas emissions are not equal with the CO2 removals, which means that we as a human actually doing a lot of activities that are emitting the greenhouse gases, and therefore we're not really reaching the balance between human cost greenhouse gas emission as well as human cost removals here. So that imbalance between the amount of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere and also the amount of carbon absorbed result in the net accumulation of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere here. And therefore, what does it mean by net zero actually is not to completely going zero emissions, because of course there should be some activities that's still going on, but actually we need to reach a balance between anthropogenic emission sources and removals here. So this graph showcasing you what is actually meaning the reaching net zero here. And because so many companies actually asking SBTi to push forward with the Science-Based Target Initiative net zero standard, just last year during the COP26, SBTi actually are launching the net zero framework here. So that is actually to facilitate the companies that want to validate their targets to be in line with science, but also to provide some of the framework how a company can contribute to the net zero here. So there are 4 steps for a company to joining the SBTi net zero framework. The first one eventually is the set near-term science-based target, which is 5 to 10 years emission reductions. That is in line with the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathways here. And the second one is to set the long-term science-based target to reduce the emissions in the residual level in line with 1.5 scenarios by no later than 2050. Why actually the companies need to set both near-term science-based target and also long-term science-based targets? Eventually, because net zero is a long-term target, and we want to encourage companies to still take action as immediate as possible by taking the near-term science-based target, which is a shorter time frame, 5 to 10 years, and then eventually those near-term science-based targets, when being combined, are becoming the long-term science-based targets here. And then the third requirement actually is the neutralization of residual emission. You may see from the graph on the left-hand side here that after reaching the number 1 and number 2, which is the reduction to be in line with the 1.5 degrees Celsius, there are still a small amount of the emissions being left, which cannot be reduced anymore, although the best effort already being done by companies. That is actually what we call as the unabated emission, or the emission that cannot be reduced further. We estimate that one to be 10% of the remaining emission from the company. So the company needs to reduce 90% of emissions by 2050 or before, and then those 10% actually are being neutralized by 4 steps, which is the greenhouse gas releases into the atmosphere when achieved the long-term science-based target must be counterbalanced through the permanent removal and storage of carbon from the atmosphere here. So those are number 1, number 2, and number 3. Number 4, which is the required one. And we have number 3 also, which is eventually beyond value chain mitigation. This is only a recommendation, which means that the company can still facilitate or invest in the carbon offset or carbon credits outside of the value chain after going to the mitigation hierarchy, which is to reduce their own value chain. And then if they already in line with the target, they can recommend to go beyond value chain mitigation as well. And then this is just to showcase you a single company's roadmap to a better ESG performance here, what actually the company can do to start going into low carbon economy. Of course, the first thing first is to disclose the information. So starting from the disclosing your information, actually you may, evaluate your performance and also how to improve the data over time. And then The next step is to calculate and report emission, because eventually by calculating the emissions, you will know also what is actually the hotspots inside of the system, and then set an emission reduction targets. Usually we recommend companies that are starting in the climate journey to start from the target that are achievable for them, and then improving that year by year after improving their capacity as well. And then, of course, report activities, including also purchasing renewable energies. And we emphasizing also collaborating with the partners to reduce emissions. And eventually, the highest performance is that to set and monitor progress to an SBTi 1.5 or net zero target here. So this is basically the journey that the company may use depending on your current performance or your current conditions. You may assess which part that you need to improve over the time here. Yeah, and this is the call to action that I encourage you to consider joining the SBTi along with the 4,000 other companies here. So the joining process is pretty simple. At day one, the company needs to commit, which is sending the commitment letters to the Science Based Targets initiative. And after that, the company's name will be showcased in the SBTi website. And from the commitments until the approval of the target, the company have 24 months to developing the target, submit with the validation from SBTi, and also communicate them when the the target are being validated to the public space here. In general, I think 24 months is still the maximum time, but we see that the time for companies to develop the target keep decreasing. So we see that, of course, the familiarity is increasing, as well as so many consultants that helping the company also having the tendency to be more familiar. Therefore, we see that 24 months will be like a very viable time for you to submit the target. And then after 24 months and the target being published, annually the company need to disclose their progress against the target. So what is actually needed is how you report the performance by your target, the achievement, what is actually the challenge, and whether you are still in line with the plan to reduce the emission as stated in the approved science-based targets here. And let me close this presentation by giving you a bit update of what is actually the upcoming work that will happen in the SBTi. So many different standards and also sectoral decarbonization approach actually are being developed right now. So the one that will be available this year and already being launched is cement, and also forestry, land use and agriculture, or FLAG, and also shipping will be launched very immediately here. And aside from that one, SBTi is also developing an MRV framework, which is monitoring, reporting, and verification that allows company to showcase their progress against the target. And as I mentioned also, there are some cross-sector guidance like beyond value chain mitigation, how can company actually utilize the carbon credits, as well as scope 3 value chain alignment, which is to improve the data over time within the scope 3, what is actually going on here. So yeah, I hope this can give you a bit of sense what is actually SBTi and can give also more context about the discussion here. Again, apologize to not being able to join the event in person. I'm looking forward to joining you and also to have a discussion about SBTi when I visit the Philippines. And I hope you had a good event today. Thank you very much and see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dedi Mahardika. Our next panelist joining us here today is an entrepreneur and an environmental scientist. He is the CEO of Vern Energy Solutions, a consultant of the Senate of the Philippines, and leads the Corporates for a Better Planet program of WWF Philippines. Let's welcome my team member, Johnny Altomonte.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Trin, and thank you everybody who's still here. Thank you, of course, to our partners SM for helping to organize this. I'm sure everybody is super excited for the technical session, and can't wait to listen to me talk about standards and frameworks, but I hope you can sit through this, and I hope this helps shed some light on what can be sort of a very confusing and the muddled world of ESG and for sustainability as well. So let's start off by talking about the alphabet soup of ESG. There's a whole bunch of different acronyms, and we've bandied them about a lot today. The GRI, SASB, TCFD, and a whole bunch of others. And at times it can be quite daunting when you're starting out, when companies especially are starting out on their sustainability journey to look at which standard or which framework should I look into for my specific company? Which ones should we do? How should we structure our reports? How do these all tie in together? And it can be quite confusing because it actually is confusing. There is a little bit of overlap. There are subsectors, and I'll get into a little bit of, what really is the difference between standards and frameworks. But some good news is that a lot of the major institutions, say GRI, SASB, the Carbon Disclosure Project, even SBTi, like Dedi mentioned earlier, there is a lot of convergence, and there are a lot of plans in place to standardize and harmonize all these different standards and frameworks. So for example, GRI and SASB, again, two acronyms, are working very closely together because there's always a lot of confusion of, should we use one or another? Or, do we have to pick one? But in essence, you can actually use both. And it's a constantly evolving field, and there is new guidance. Thank you, I can actually raise these, that's much better. And there is new guidance on how we can use both, or how do we use different standards to disclose different data and different criteria to different stakeholders, right? Whether you're an investor or whether you're, say, part of civil society. So there is a lot of convergence. It is an evolving field in that sense. And we can look forward to, I think as recently as 2022, there have been a lot of memos issued on how exactly these will all tie together in the future. But suffice to say, they all work together very harmoniously. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's not about choosing one or the other or being left out from one initiative or another initiative. The important thing is that we start on this sustainability journey, we start getting into the ESG industry, and eventually the convergence of all will really help all your companies as you are moving forward in these individual sustainability journeys. So again, really, we've talked a little bit about standards and frameworks, and I'll try to make this very quick and very simple. When we talk about frameworks, really what we're talking about is how, right? So how a report is structured. It gives this underlying structure to these sustainability reports, to this information that it's putting out. And when we're talking about standards, we're talking very specifically about what should be reported. So again, they work very harmoniously, and together they really both, standards and frameworks, underpin the entire sustainability reporting ecosystem. From the left, we have all your information producers, and the right, your information users, and standards and frameworks really underpin both. So they are essential to this whole ESG, this whole sustainability reporting ecosystem. Again, they work very harmoniously together in that sense. So again, we're also talking about materiality, and when we're talking about sustainability, really one of the biggest questions when you're starting out is, what is material? And when we're talking about materiality, that also really has evolved with time, and that's how, again, these various standards and frameworks have come about in the first place. Before, really, materiality used to focus very specifically in what is already in the financial accounts, right? So the typical financial statements that have been reported year after year, before sustainability reporting really was a thing. This was material to a company before. And essentially the next level to that is talking about reporting on sustainability. Once we're moving towards sustainability, we're talking about what is material, again, within sustainability to the company. Again, so we're still working within the company, what's material, what's important to the company. And eventually the final level to that, what we're all trying to aspire to be, and what, again, everybody before me today has iterated over and over again, we need to look beyond that and start looking outwards. What is material? What are the impacts of the company outside the sphere of influence of just that company itself? We need to look beyond that, And then we start looking at, of course, Scope 3 emissions. And again, I'm not going to reiterate what everybody else here has already said. But when we're talking about materiality and what is really important, and again, that's really where all these standards and frameworks really fit in, trying to help find the right materiality for a company. And how everything else ties in together, and again, I apologize for all the, we're going to look into some more all these other frameworks, and again, it can be quite confusing. But everything really does tie together quite coherently, and we shouldn't be afraid, again, of trying to point one or the other. Once we found out what is material, and we can use, again, a number of different frameworks or standards to find what is material, we can use that data. By building that database, we can then point and go across the board to, again, all these different stakeholders, and they all tie into a comprehensive sustainability report. And we can use data to help that as well, right? By building very concrete, by having a lot of transparency in our data collection, we can then turn that data into other forms of reports, again, depending on where everything fits in. So if you look at this nice little framework here, we have, if we use the example of a framework, such as, say, integrated reporting, there are a number of different standards that can fit under that, such as the SASB, and everything kind of fits into this one report. And we use, for example, if you look at the top, saying EDGAR is used in the United States. This is where companies who have sustainability reports upload all their data, right? So there's one portal for a country where all the information goes, and we can use data and technology in that sense to really help publicize and help increase transparency of these data, of the data that we're collecting, of the standards and the frameworks that we're using. One major, I think, and it's very relevant also to the Philippines, if we're trying to reach international standards of reporting and reach international standards of disclosures and transparency. The CDP right now has a portal that isn't nation-specific, so it is agnostic, where everybody can upload their sustainability data. And again, the important thing is trying to harmonize across all these standards and frameworks. And if we follow materiality, and if we just follow the basic principles and standards of materiality, everything is cohesive between and amongst all these different standards and frameworks. So again, I know it's a lot to take in. I see some heads like nodding off, but stick with me. When we use data and technology, and we use the standards and frameworks that are in place, these international standards and frameworks, we come out with very, very strong sustainability reports and create value for our stakeholders and our investors as well. So where does that lead us, and where does that lead us today? The field, again, as I mentioned, and this is, again, one of the daunting aspects of ESG, is that it's rapidly evolving. For example, in 2022, ESG growth in Asia has been unparalleled. A number of countries around Asia, so Japan, for example, and China, have come out with very strong ESG policies and regulations. Countries in Southeast Asia as well have stepped up, so Singapore has come up with a lot of new regulation to prevent greenwashing in ESG disclosures, and Indonesia has as well. It's also really important to note that it's not just the private sector. For example, this forum in itself is a very, very good market indicator that ESG is on the rise here in the Philippines. But it's not just companies within the sector, within Asia, that are really taking ESG very seriously, but also international investors. For example, Petronas in Malaysia was removed from JP Morgan's ESG fund, and that's a really big sign that international investors are also really looking into ESG and to proper disclosure and the proper use of ESG, and really avoiding greenwashing and all these various reports. Because also, with the rise of ESG, greenwashing has risen too. One of the more egregious examples has been South Korea, and analysts recently found out that from the ESG funds in South Korea, only 3%, actually go to environmental projects. The rest typically go to other projects that may or may not, according to analysts, they do not really affect ESG. Another big example is that I believe a $500 million fund went into developing natural gas projects. So greenwashing is on the rise, and that is something we also need to consider as well. And there are a number of things we can do to really take into account very, very deeply to avoid these sorts of issues. Number one is consistency, where we really need to follow a lot of the standards and frameworks by the experts that have put these in place, and trust in the process of convergence as well, and that by following the principles, following these standards, we can harmonize the data and make sure that everybody is on the same page, that no matter what sustainability report you're reading, no matter what data you're reading, it is equivalent to whatever company we're working with. Transparency is also very key, being able to disclose not just the data or not just the results, but the methodologies you use as well. Because data is one thing, but how you get that data is a completely other thing. So we really, really need to work on transparency as well. And communication, of course, is always critical in communicating these properly to our stakeholders. So the Philippines is very new to the ESG market, but that also poses a very significant opportunity where we can learn from the mistakes of the West, for example. We can learn from the mistakes of those other markets that are now, coming into a lot of scrutiny when it comes to greenwashing and when it comes to all these other potential issues. And it really takes, again, everybody, it takes all the various stakeholders, investors, private companies, the various stakeholders, civil society, to really come together and make sure that as we grow this ESG industry, as we continue with our sustainability reports, we're doing it in the right way, and we're doing it in a way that will boost the whole economy and boost the whole country as well. And finally, I want to throw one more acronym out there. So here at CBPI, the program I lead at WWF, just to explain what we're doing in this sector, we're currently helping companies, our partner companies, make sense of, again, all these different standards and all these different frameworks. But another really important aspect is doing that within the context of the Philippines. Materiality is very different for each company. It's different for different business units in each company. It's different for different locations across the Philippines. And sustainability is entirely about context. What is sustainable for one company might not be sustainable for another. The sustainability issues, for example, of Century Pacific, who's here earlier, will be completely different from the sustainability issues or what is material to SM. So at CBPI, that's what we try to help figure out. We try to figure out, this very bespoke, science-based way of what is true sustainability, what is the essence of true sustainability for a specific company. So I hope that wasn't too long for everybody, because we still have one more speaker for this panel before jumping into the questions. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to any questions also later.
Thank you very much, Johnny. In the interest of time, I will introduce our third panelist and immediately call both of you on stage. We will go direct to Q&A. So our next speaker is a chemist, a sustainability, science, and strategy advocate, and is the lead consultant for the Nomura Research Institute Manila Sustainability Office. He's also a 2022 Island Innovation Ambassador, European Climate Pact Ambassador in the Philippines, and member of the Society of Sustainability Practitioners and Sustainable PH. Please welcome Mr. Jonas Dumdum. Jonas, I'm so sorry not having time for your presentation. May I ask you to join us on...
Okay, awesome.
So, given I cut your time, Jonas, I am so sorry. Let me ask you the first question. So you've worked with various sustainability teams and investor relation teams on all these sustainability issues, as Johnny said, the alphabet soup of ESG. Where do you think are the barriers or the struggles of the teams that you work with?
Well, let me just get my código here to give you an idea of where are we actually struggling when it comes to this topic, this question. First of all, I've been working in the sustainability space for about 3 years, and what I've observed in all of those 3 years are just 3 things. First is that whenever we talk about the dreaded issue of Scope 3, you have 15 categories. And not those 15 categories are really, no, I mean, we don't know much really about them unless you tie it up with a scope 1 or a scope 2 of your supply chain. So it becomes difficult for us to really identify which is relevant, which is not. And with the mandate of adding scope 3 next year, it would probably be something of a discussion matter come actually next month if you really want to pursue scope 3. Second is that in climate scenario analysis, there is no nationally based climate scenario. Everyone you ask about climate scenario analysis, they'll probably cite an RCP pathway or a WWF pathway or like an IEA pathway. But if you really want to be serious about, or if you really want to know how the situation is in the national level, we don't have that, right? And lastly, sometimes companies get lost in the idea of sustainability because the employees are not fully informed. So the issue of instilling sustainability in organizational culture is now becoming an issue because, you know, if we're going to do all of this, we have to be in it together. And yeah, I think that should
Great. Thank you very much. No, I mean, points that were echoed by our panel members in the earlier sessions. I will move on to the next question then. Who is getting it right? So to the keynote speaker's point earlier and the inputs that you gave just now, Johnny, why don't you take this question?
Yeah. It's a bit of a tricky question, right? When we talk about who's getting it right, I think there's a lot of baby steps that have been taken, I think, in sort of this space. A lot of mistakes have been made, a lot of learning still needed to be done. I think there are many companies that have really taken the lead in a lot of different areas and that really have, really put their best foot forward. And in some cases, it's the nature of sort of what we're trying to measure. When we're talking about, say, scope 3 emissions, right, which are notoriously, again, very, very difficult. It can be a bit difficult, and in some cases, even the companies with the best intentions come in trying to measure these scope 3 emissions, and there still is some confusion. There is still some double counting involved. I think the standards and frameworks in place are very strong. I think adherence to them will result in you getting it as right as possible. And I think, again, just as long as we try to follow these standards and frameworks to the best efforts, and we try to interpret them in a way that we're really looking for sustainability, we end up with the best possible data and the best possible report and the best possible foot forward.
Thank you very much. Jonas?
I think I have nothing to add, really. Johnny already said it all.
Okay. No, I will move on to the next question then. So, plastics. Is this climate action if you have a program on plastics?
Okay, so that's a very good question because if you look at it in a circular economy perspective, you don't. You put plastics as part of climate change. But if you're looking at emissions management, plastics belong to waste generated in operations. That's a category in scope 3. So if you're going to be measuring your impact in the disposal of your plastics or reusability or recyclability, that has a certain emission factor attached to it. Therefore, it is still a climate matter. Now, we can talk about, for example, ocean pollution, river pollution. That's also actually your top level idea of impact of plastics to the environment. But if you're looking at it in an accounting perspective, that's still scope 3.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that as well, I think it's also very important, again, if we're looking at these standards and frameworks, how we communicate and how we phrase this, tackling the issue of plastic is very, very important. To the example of, for example, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, right? When we're talking about using plastics, we're talking about the life cycle of our product, and we're phrasing that very specifically to hit decarbonization targets. For example, that's a no-go, right? So we need to be very careful about how we phrase using plastics as a climate solution, how we phrase that within these accounting systems, so sustainability accounting systems. That's very, very important. I think something everybody should really take into account.
Right, thank you very much. Now, as we're on our last 30 seconds, quick answers. What's your advice to the future Alliance for Climate Action?
Simply to just think about what needs to be measured, what needs to be done. You can't do anything if you cannot measure, basically. You can't determine where are you having an impact if you don't even know where it's coming from. And if you already know where it's coming from, you should already set the parameters of how you measure it and then set your baseline before you set your targets. Because if you not do all of those before you set your targets, then it becomes a problem. It ends up kind of like greenwashing in a sense. So.
Yeah, my quick advice, I think, for the Alliance on Climate Action is to simply just get started. I think it's a critical component of hitting the sustainability targets, hitting our science-based targets, especially, again, with the big problem of Scope 3, when we're talking about emissions across the value chain, across the supply chain. That only happens with very, very organized cooperation between and amongst non-state stakeholders. So I think this Alliance for Climate Action will be very, very critical for each company here when we're trying to decarbonize and we're trying to look at Scope 3 emissions. So just get started.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. And that concludes our session, Measuring What Matters. Very thankful for everyone's participation. So let's give our knowledge panel a big hand. Thank you, Johnny, Jonas, and Deddy, who joined us on Zoom. Okay, we have a photo op.